Hey there, deep divers. We're diving into a topic today that I think we can all relate to procrastination. But here's the thing, we're going way beyond the typical productivity advice, the whole make a to-do list and just get started thing.
Yeah, goes so much deeper than
It
that.
really does. We've got a really interesting mix of sources today. We've got a productivity blog, She Dreams All Day. We have some really expert insights from places like Mind Tools and Get Response. We're even looking at legacy coaching, a website called Decide Your Legacy.
That's a lot of perspectives.
I know, right? Talk about a bunch of different viewpoints to look at this problem. And one of the things that really stood out to me going through these sources was this idea that procrastination, it might not be about laziness after all.
Oh, interesting.
What if it's more about fear? Like maybe you're putting things off because you're secretly terrified of messing up. Or, and this is crazy, what if you're actually scared of succeeding?
Well, and that's something that we see a lot in the material we're looking at today. We think of procrastination as just this lack of willpower, but it's so much more complicated than that.
Okay, so let's dig into this a bit. In She Dreams All Day, the blogger Mia, she describes procrastination as this, like, unwanted friend that always shows up at the worst possible time.
I get it.
Like when you finally sit down to work on that big project and suddenly it's like, oh, I have to reorganize my entire desk right now.
Right. It's the ultimate distraction. And Mind Tools actually points out that procrastination, it's not about being inactive. It's actually you're actively choosing to do something else instead of the task at hand.
It's an active choice.
Yeah. And that choice is often driven by fear. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, even just fear of starting something new and difficult.
I can definitely see that in myself. I've definitely been guilty of putting things off because I'm scared of what might happen if I actually give it a try. And speaking of relatable moments, Mia, she's got this funny quirk to checks off tasks she's already done just to get that feeling of accomplishment. Have you ever done that?
Oh, absolutely, all the time.
Oh my gosh, me too. It's like we're tricking our brains into liking productivity or something.
It's brilliant, actually.
Hmm.
We're wired to want those rewards, so why not create those little wins for ourselves?
Right.
Right? It might seem silly, but, those little victories can build momentum.
I love that. But we have to address the other side of this too. We can't just ignore the downsides of procrastination. It's not all fun and games.
Right?
Like that YouTube video transcript we have, it lays out all the risks. Stress, anxiety, missed goals. It can even lead to job loss. It's serious.
Yeah, people think it's just a harmless quirk, but the reality is it can have these huge consequences in our lives.
And decide your legacy. That's where it really hit home for me. The author, Adam Gregg, he talks about counting the cost of procrastination. He makes you think about the long-term impact of putting things, especially in those areas of life that really matter, like our health, our relationships, finances.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. If you keep putting off that doctor's appointment or that important conversation you need to have with a loved one, or even just, saving for retirement, it's not just inconvenient. It's setting yourself up for potentially bigger problems down the road.
Right. Those little delays can add up over time and create much bigger issues later.
So, okay, we know procrastination is bad, but how do we actually stop? Like, I'm sure everyone listening has heard all the advice before, right? Make a plan, set deadlines, all that. But let's be honest, sometimes that stuff just doesn't work.
It's true. It's not always that simple, is it? It's much more complex than just do it. And that's why I'm really interested in this idea of temptation bundling. That was something that they mentioned in Procrastination, a scientific guide, and it really resonated with me. Basically, you link something you actually enjoy to a task you typically put off.
Temptation bundling. Okay, so like I can only watch my favorite show while I'm cleaning the bathroom. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. You're turning that dreaded chore into something you actually look forward to. It's like a reward system for your brain.
I am going to try that. That's amazing. Another thing I saw that popped up in both Decide Your Legacy and the How to Stop Procrastinating article from Get Response was this idea of breaking down, those big, overwhelming tasks into smaller, bite-sized steps.
Yes, it's such a classic piece of advice, but it works for a reason. When you're facing this huge project and you just feel totally paralyzed.
Oh, all the time.
But then if you break it down into these smaller, much more manageable chunks, suddenly it doesn't seem so scary anymore.
It's like that old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So instead of focusing on writing that whole report, you could just start with outlining the main points. Or even just start by writing the introduction.
Exactly. And Decide Your Legacy. actually suggest working in these 15-minute increments. They say even just 15 minutes of focused effort, that's all it takes to start making a real difference.
I love that. It makes productivity feel a lot more attainable. Now, I have to tell you, reading through that Get Response article, I felt so seen. Like they talked about the constant distractions of social media and all those, those websites that are just so much fun to scroll through, especially when you're working online. It's a real struggle.
Oh, I know. It's like the digital age dilemma. We're
Yeah.
just bombarded with information and entertainment all the time, and it is so easy to fall into that trap, that vortex of distraction.
So, how do we combat that? How do we get out of that?
Well, the Get Response article, they had a couple of really practical solutions, like using apps that limit your time on certain websites. Those ones that basically put you in digital timeout.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely used those.
They can be lifesavers, right?
It's amazing how much more you can get done when you're not like constantly checking your phone every 5 seconds.
Right. Another thing they suggested was to actually work in incognito mode.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that private browsing mode where you're not logged into all your accounts and all that.
So, why does that help?
Well, it just creates this tiny bit of friction between you and those websites. You're less likely to go down that rabbit hole if you have to manually log in and, navigate to those distracting sites. It's a small change, but it could make a difference.
Okay, yeah, that's really clever. I'm going to give that a try.
Yeah.
Speaking of clever productivity hacks, I came across this cool method in the Procrastination, a scientific guide. It's called Ivy Lee's method. Have you heard of this one?
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic.
Okay, so break it down for me. What is the secret to this magical Ivy Lee method?
It's about prioritizing and just giving your day a little structure. And it's really simple, which I love about it. So at the end of your day, you just write down the 6 most important things you need to do tomorrow, no more, no less, and then you rank them. You put them in an order of importance, like what absolutely has to get done.
Okay, so you're not just making a list. You're really thinking about what's the most important.
Exactly. Then when you start work the next day, you focus only on that first task on the list. Just gives your full attention until it's done, and then you move on to the second one, and so on, right down the list.
Okay, so it's all about single tasking, basically.
Yes. Just focus on one thing at a time, get rid of the distractions, and then at the end of the day, whatever you didn't finish, you just move it to your new list for the next day, repeat that process every day, and it becomes a habit, a really good one.
I love that. It's so straightforward. No fancy apps or anything, just a simple method. I was reading the Get Response article, and there was one thing they said that I thought was hilarious, but also so true. They said that sometimes we even procrastinate on stopping procrastination.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. It's like, okay, I'm going to get organized. I'm going to tackle all those things I've been putting off. But first, let me just check my email one more time.
Yeah, and then 3 hours later, you're still in your inbox. But you know what? Mind Tools had a really great point that I wanted to bring up here. They said that procrastination, it's not a character flaw, it's a habit. And like any habit, it can be broken.
That's such an important thing to remember. We're not doomed to procrastinate forever. With a little effort and the right strategies, we can absolutely change those behaviors and create more productive patterns for ourselves.
It's hopeful. And, Decide Your Legacy had another great point that I wanted to touch on here. They remind us that we don't have to go it alone. Asking for help, saying no to things that aren't that important, and just prioritizing our own well-being. Those are all part of having a more productive and fulfilling life.
It's about being kind to ourselves.
Yeah.
Recognizing that we all have limits.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground here today, but I really want to hear what you all think out there, deep divers. Do any of these ideas resonate with you? What are your biggest struggles with procrastination? What strategies have worked for you in the past?
We'd love to hear from you.
Because maybe, just maybe, by exploring these different perspectives and sharing our own experiences, we can all start to break free from those procrastination habits and create a future where we're more productive, more fulfilled, and less stressed.
Yeah, I think that's a great goal. And, there was one fascinating point in the Mind Tools article that I think deserves a deeper dive.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
They were talking about how, procrastination is a habit, but it's not really about willpower.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's more about managing our emotions. Like, think about it. We often procrastinate when we're feeling overwhelmed or stressed or anxious.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So it's not that we're lazy, it's that we're trying to avoid those icky, uncomfortable feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes those feelings are so intense that we would rather do anything else, even if it means, jeopardizing our long-term goals.
So how do we deal with those emotions? We can't just, like, ignore them, right?
Right? Procrastination. A scientific guide suggests that we need to acknowledge those emotions. Like, don't try to suppress them. Just recognize that it's okay to feel overwhelmed or stressed. It's normal.
So instead of, like, beating ourselves up for feeling those things, we can just, hey, I'm feeling stressed right now. It's okay. What can I do to maybe, like, manage this in a healthy way?
Exactly. And sometimes that means, taking a break or going for a walk or talking to someone about how you're feeling.
Yeah, that's a good point. We do try to just power through those emotions a lot of the time. But sometimes the best thing you can do is just give yourself a break. And speaking of self-care, Decide Your Legacy, that one really emphasized taking care of ourselves if we want to beat procrastination.
Yeah, it's crucial, right? We can't expect to, perform at our best if we're running on empty.
Right.
Adam Gregg, he talks about how important it is to get enough sleep, to exercise regularly, to eat healthy foods, all those things we know we should be doing. But let's be honest, we don't always prioritize.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, I know when I'm burnt out, I am way more likely to just say, forget it, I'll do it tomorrow. It's like my brain just can't even handle thinking about one more thing.
It's like we're trying to run a marathon with no fuel in the tank. And just like a car needs gas, our brains and bodies need, those essential nutrients and rest to function properly.
Okay, so we've got managing our emotions, taking care of ourselves, but what about those times when we're just stuck? Like we're staring at that blank page or we're looking at this massive to-do list and we just can't seem to get started.
That's where She Dreams All Day had some really interesting insights. Mia talks about the importance of understanding our why. Like, what's the reason behind this task? What's driving you?
Our why. So, like, why are we doing this thing in the first place?
Exactly. When you have a clear sense of purpose, it becomes easier to overcome those moments of resistance.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Like, if I actually know why I'm doing something, it's probably going to feel more meaningful, more important. But what if the task is just, like, boring or tedious? I mean, I can't really get excited about doing my taxes no matter how much I try to, like, reframe it.
That's where procrastination, a scientific guide, comes in. They talk about this concept called reframing, where you try to shift your perspective on the task to make it more appealing.
Reframing. Okay, so, like, I'm not just doing my taxes. I'm taking control of my finances and ensuring my financial security. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. You're focusing on the positive outcomes rather
Yeah.
than, those kind of unpleasant parts.
Okay, yeah, I like that. It's like finding that little silver lining, even in those tasks that we really, really dread. But what about the times when we put things off just because we're afraid we're going to fail?
Yeah, that's a really common one. And Mind Tools had some really solid advice about that. They suggest that we try to focus on the process, rather than getting fixated on the outcome.
So, like, instead of just thinking about the end goal, we're just taking those small steps.
Exactly. And celebrating those small wins along the way. Decide Your Legacy actually suggested that we think of each 15-minute increment of work as a win, regardless of whether we finish the whole thing or not.
Yeah, that takes the pressure off having to be perfect. It's like, hey, I did something, I moved forward. But, distractions, they're a part of life, especially in today's world. Like, even with the best intentions, there's always something vying for our attention.
It's true. The Get Response article talked a lot about the constant temptation of social media, and fun websites and just all those instant messaging apps, especially when you're trying to work online.
It's a battle for our attention spans.
It really is.
Hmm.
So they recommended a few different strategies, like using apps to limit your time on certain websites. Those ones that basically put your phone on timeout.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely used those. And it's amazing how much more you can get done when you're not constantly checking your phone.
Right. And then another one they suggested was to work in that incognito mode.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, so you're not tempted by those personalized notifications.
You're creating a little bit of separation between you and the dopamine rush of social media.
Exactly. And then they also talked about the importance of having a designated workspace, a place where you can focus and minimize those distractions.
So no more working from the couch with the TV on in the background.
Ideally not. Having a dedicated space can help tell your brain, okay, it's time to focus and get things done.
It's like a boundary almost.
Exactly. Now, procrastination. A scientific guide introduced this concept called implementation intentions. And that's basically creating an if-then plan that tells you exactly when and where you're going to work on something.
Implementation intentions. Okay, so if it's 8 a.m., then I will sit down at my desk and start working on that project.
Exactly. You're removing that decision-making in the moment. You're just doing it.
I like that.
And, she dreams all day. They talk about the importance of setting those time-bound goals to create a sense of urgency and accountability.
So instead of like, oh, I'm going to do that sometime this week, it's, okay, I'm going to do that by 5 p.m. on Friday.
Exactly. You're giving yourself a deadline. And sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah, sometimes it really is. It's like, oh, okay, I have to do it. Now, Decide Your Legacy had a great point that we haven't talked about yet. They emphasize that we should really be spending our time on things that actually align with our values and goals, even if they aren't the most urgent or enjoyable things on our list.
It's about being intentional with our time and energy, right?
Yeah.
Not just blindly checking things off a to-do list.
Yeah, it's about the big picture. And then there was this fascinating point in Procrastination, a scientific guide that I wanted to bring up. They called it time inconsistency. Have you heard of that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so what is it?
It's basically that struggle between our present selves and our future selves.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, our future selves, they can set all these goals, make all these plans, but it's our present selves that have to actually decide whether or not we're going to take action.
Yeah, so it's that tension between what we know we should do and what feels good in the moment.
Exactly. And because our brains are hardwired to go for that instant gratification, those long-term goals, they just get pushed aside.
Yeah, it's hard to resist sometimes. So how do we overcome that? How do we make choices that are good for our future selves?
Well, the guide suggested a few things. One was temptation bundling. So that's that thing we talked about where you link something you like with a task you don't. And then the other thing was to make the consequences of procrastination like more immediate.
Okay, so like if I don't finish this project by the deadline, then I have to donate to a charity I hate. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. You're creating a real cost to putting things off, something your present self can't ignore.
That's a good one. It's a little sneaky, but I like it.
And then, She's Dreams All Day really encouraged readers to be mindful of their thoughts, especially those sneaky excuses we tell ourselves when we're trying to justify procrastinating.
Oh, those excuses. We're all guilty of it. It's like our brains are experts at rationalizing.
It's true. And Mia, she suggested that we ask ourselves a few questions. Like, why am I putting this off? What thoughts am I having right now? What's my reason for delaying? And what thoughts can I have that would actually support me in getting this done?
So it's all about checking in with ourselves, examining those thought patterns.
Exactly. And sometimes just by, bringing those thoughts into the light and questioning them, that's enough to weaken their hold.
Like you're shining a light on the procrastination monster and taking away its power.
I love that. And procrastination. Scientific guide. They had another point that I thought was really surprising. They said that motivation actually comes after you start something, not before.
Wait, really? So you don't have to wait until you feel motivated to actually do something?
Right. They actually suggested that by just starting, even if you don't feel like it, you'll often spark that motivation as you go.
Oh, that's interesting. It's like, jumping in the pool instead of standing on the edge, debating whether the water's warm enough.
Perfect analogy. And once you're in the pool, you realize it's actually more fun than you thought it would be.
Yeah, it's like you overcome that initial inertia, and then you're just off to the races.
Exactly. Decide Your Legacy. Talked about the importance of having those time-bound goals.
So instead of like vaguely aiming to get that done sometime soon, it's I'm going to finish that project by, next Tuesday at 5 p.m.
Right. Those deadlines, they can be really motivating, especially if you, make them public or you share them with somebody else.
Yeah, it's almost like you're creating this social contract, holding yourself accountable.
Precisely. And She Dreams All Day. She had a similar reminder about how we should honor those commitments to ourselves with the same respect that we would, a meeting with a friend.
It's about respecting your time, recognizing that it's valuable.
Yeah, it really is. And then we've talked about this before, but it came up again in a few of our sources. That idea of breaking down those big, overwhelming tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Oh, right. It's the classic advice. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And procrastination, a scientific guide, even calls it chunking. It's taking those big, scary tasks and just making them into these smaller, bite-sized pieces.
So instead of focusing on writing the whole report, you could just focus on outlining the main points first, or even just write the introduction and then go from there.
Exactly. And Decide Your Legacy even recommended working in 15-minute increments.
15 minutes. That seems really doable.
It is. And the point is to view each of those 15 minutes as a win, regardless of whether you finish the whole task or not.
It's taking that pressure off of being perfect. Yeah.
Exactly. And then She Dreams All Day had this great point about how, it's not about how much time you spend on a task, it's about the value you're producing.
Oh, that's a good one. So it's not about the quantity of time, it's the quality of the output.
Exactly. And then procrastination. A scientific guide had this other really interesting point, and this is something that I think a lot of people probably struggle with. They said that the task you're most likely to procrastinate on is often the most important one.
Ooh, that's a good point. It's like the more you avoid something, the bigger and scarier it
Yeah.
seems.
Right. And they suggested that you actually try to tackle those dreaded tasks first thing in the morning. Get them out of the way so you can enjoy that sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, you're clearing that hurdle, and then the rest of the day seems easier.
Exactly. And then decide your legacy. Pose this really interesting question. What are some things that should be less of a priority in your life?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
It's about challenging our assumptions about how we spend our time. Like, what can we let go of?
Exactly. Sometimes we have to let go of things that aren't serving us anymore to make room for the things that really matter.
So it's about making those conscious choices about where you're putting your energy.
Yeah. And She Dreams All Day had this beautiful point about how the thoughts we allow to occupy our minds, they directly influence our actions, and the results we see in our lives.
So it's not just about managing our time, it's about managing our mindset.
Precisely. And, by becoming more aware of those thoughts, those inner narratives that are shaping our behaviors, we can start to challenge the ones that lead to procrastination.
It's like almost like rewiring your brain, right?
Yes, kind of. And then there was this concept of reframing
Yeah.
that we've touched on a little bit, but it came up again in Procrastination, a scientific guide. And I found it really helpful. It's basically about shifting your perspective on tasks to make them seem more appealing or meaningful.
Okay, reframing. I like that word. How does that work, like practically speaking?
Okay, so let's say you're dreading a certain task because it's boring. Instead of just focusing on how much you hate it, try to think about the benefits, how it fits into your goals, or how it's going to make your life easier once it's done.
So find that silver lining, even in those tasks that you really don't want to do.
Exactly. Or if you're avoiding something because you're afraid of failing, maybe reframe failure as just a learning experience.
Yeah, like it's not a failure, it's just feedback, right?
Right. And decide your legacy. They reminded us that asking for help isn't a weakness, it's a strength.
Oh, that's such a good point. So often we try to do everything ourselves when sometimes it really would help to just reach out and ask for support.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Adam Gregg, he shared that connecting with supportive people and being vulnerable, that's helped him a lot in his journey.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we're not in this alone. And then She Dreams All Day. She had this beautiful reminder about how we should cherish the time we set aside for things and treat ourselves, with the same respect that we would a friend.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's about honoring our commitments, especially the ones we make to ourselves.
Exactly. Now, another thing that came up in Procrastination, a scientific guide, was this idea of pre-commitment. And that's about making choices ahead of time so that even when our willpower is low, we're still making those good choices.
Pre-commitment. Okay, that sounds powerful. What are some examples of that?
So, like setting up automatic savings deductions from your paycheck. That way, you're saving money consistently, even when you might be tempted to spend it.
Ah, so you're automating those good behaviors so they just happen on autopilot.
Exactly. Or if you're trying to eat healthier, you could prep all your meals on the weekend so you have healthy food ready to go when you're busy.
Oh, that's a good one. It's like anticipating your future self's needs.
Precisely. And then, go back to Decide Your Legacy. They emphasize the importance of really focusing on those tasks that align with our values and goals, even if they're not the most fun.
Yeah, it's not just about checking things off a to-do list. It's about doing work that actually matters.
Exactly. And Procrastination, a scientific guide, had this interesting concept called habit stacking. That's where you link a new habit you're trying to build with an existing habit that you already do, so you're more likely to stick with it.
Habit stacking. Okay, that sounds interesting. How does that work?
So let's say you want to start meditating for 5 minutes every morning. Instead of, creating a whole new routine from scratch, you could just tack it onto something you already do, like brushing your teeth. So after you brush your teeth, you just sit down and meditate for 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. So it's like you're creating a little trigger in your brain. You finish one thing, you automatically do the next.
Exactly. It's leveraging that existing routine to support the new habit.
It's like you're creating a positive feedback loop.
Exactly. Now, a lot of what we've talked about today has been focused on those individual strategies for dealing with procrastination, but I think Decide Your Legacy had a really good point about looking at the bigger picture. What's the impact of your choices on your life as a whole?
Yeah, it's not just about getting things done, it's about living a life that you're proud of, a life that feels meaningful.
Exactly. And she Dreams All Day talked about the importance of creating a work environment that actually supports your productivity and well-being.
Oh, yeah. So it's not just about time management, it's about managing your space.
Right. Like Mia, she talked about getting rid of distractions and creating a sense of calm and surrounding yourself with things that inspire you.
It's almost like curating your space to support your best self.
Exactly. And, I think going through all this research, it became really clear that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to procrastination.
Yeah, we're all different, right?
Yeah.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Absolutely. It's about experimenting and finding what works for you, your personality, your work style.
It's about knowing yourself.
Exactly. And then procrastination. The scientific guide had this really great tip about making those strategies more effective. And it's something that we've talked about already, but it bears repeating. It's called implementation intentions.
Oh, right, right. Those if-then plans. Remind me again what those are.
Basically, it's a plan where you decide exactly when and where you're going to do something. So instead of just saying like, oh, I'm going to work out more, you say, if it's Monday, Wednesday, or Friday at 7 a.m., then I'm going for a run.
Okay, yeah. It's taking the decision-making out of it.
Exactly. And by deciding ahead of time, you're creating that mental trigger.
I like that. It's like setting yourself up for success.
Hmm.
But let's be real, even with the best strategies, there are going to be times when we still struggle with procrastination.
Of course, we're human. There are always going to be times when our motivation is low or we just don't feel like doing things.
So in those moments, how do we pick ourselves back up? How do we get back on track?
Well, that's where self-compassion comes in. Decide Your Legacy reminded us that we don't have to be perfect, to be successful.
Yeah, it's about being kind to yourself, recognizing that everybody makes mistakes.
Exactly. And Dreams All Day talked about the importance of celebrating those small wins, those little victories that keep us going.
It's about focusing on the progress, not the perfection.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Decide Your Legacy encouraged us to view every day as a fresh start.
A chance to start over, to try again.
Exactly. And there was one final point in procrastination, a scientific guide that I thought was particularly thought-provoking.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with it. Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with it.
Well, they were talking about how procrastination, sometimes it's actually a form of self-protection.
Self-protection? Wait, what do you mean?
Well, think about it this way. Sometimes we put off those really big, important tasks, not just because we're afraid of failing, but because we're actually afraid of what might happen if we succeed.
Oh, wow. I never thought of it that way. So it's not just fear of failure, it's fear of success.
Yeah. It's like our subconscious is saying, hey, if we don't even try, then we can't really fail. But then, of course, the other side of that is we can't really succeed either.
That is a mind-blowing concept.
Yeah.
So how do we, break free from that fear? What do we do?
Well, she dreams all day. She had some really good advice for dealing with fear in general. Mia talks about how important it is to get out of our comfort zones and to just take action, like massive action.
So it's about facing those fears head on, even if it feels a little scary.
Exactly. And Decide Your Legacy takes that idea a step further. Adam Gregg talks about thinking about the legacy we want to leave behind.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not just about what we accomplish in our own lives, it's about the impact we have on other people.
Yeah, exactly. When we connect our actions to a bigger purpose, something that's beyond ourselves, it can give us that extra courage to overcome those fears and take those leaps.
Yeah, you're tapping into something bigger than yourself. But okay, let's be real for a second. Even with all this incredible advice we've talked about today, sometimes procrastination just feels inevitable.
Yeah, I get that.
It's like it's just part of who we are, you know?
Well, and, I think there's some truth to that. Procrastination, it's a universal human experience. We've all been there, done that.
So what's the takeaway here? Are we doomed to just procrastinate forever?
No, I don't think so. And remember, Mind Tools, they made a really great point about how procrastination is a habit, not a personality defect.
Oh, right, right.
And habits can be changed. It might not be easy, but it can be done.
That's a good reminder. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into procrastination, what's like the one piece of advice that you would give to our listeners who are struggling with this? If they could only take away one thing, what would it be?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's so much good stuff out there, but if I had to pick just one thing, I'd say be kind to yourself.
Be kind to yourself.
Yeah. A lot of times procrastination is fueled by that shame and self-criticism. We beat ourselves up for not being productive enough or for not meeting our own expectations. And that negative self-talk, it just makes things worse.
Yeah, it's so easy to get down on yourself. So instead of like being so hard on ourselves, we should try to be more understanding.
Exactly. We're all human. We all have those moments when we struggle, and it's okay.
It's okay to not be perfect all the time.
Exactly. And remember, She Dreams All Day reminded us that it's important to celebrate those small wins.
Oh, yeah, those little victories along the way, they keep us going.
And Decide Your Legacy encouraged us to view each day as a new opportunity,
Yeah.
a chance to make progress, even if it's just a little bit,
It's a chance to create the life that you really want to live.
and to face the future with that sense of hope and possibility.
So, deep divers, as you go out there and tackle those to-do lists, remember to be kind to yourselves, celebrate those wins, no matter how small, and just keep diving deep into those fascinating worlds inside your own minds.
Until next time, happy exploring.